Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a longer one, but it's going to be filled to the brim with information and personal experience about leopard geckos and ovulation, egg laying, and just the most stressful time of the year for leopard gecko parents. I am also going to have a video about male geckos and their reproductive health as well. It will not be as long as this one, but I do have quite a bit of issues when it comes to my male geckos as well. So I feel quite eager to share that information for anyone who might also be having these struggles. But today's video is all about the ladies. So I have more female geckos than I have male geckos. I don't know how that turned out, but it did. And throughout the years of keeping them, I have come across a number of experiences ranging from just regular ovulation to follicle stasis to being egg bound to healthily and properly laying eggs. So I figured I would talk about all of that in one place so that I could put some of you at ease who are also dealing with ovulating geckos, because it can be stressful. As I normally do, I'm going to be leaving a list of timestamps down below for you to be able to jump around the video at your discretion. Now let's get into a few disclaimers, which are important. People don't like that I put a lot of disclaimers in the beginning because it makes the video long, but in the pet community you kind of have to put disclaimers. You have to cover your bases. So here we go. 1. This is not for people who want to breed. This video is for people who are pet parents. I am not a breeder, so I don't have breeding experience, and therefore I will not be covering breeding whatsoever. 2. I will be showing images of eggs, newly laid ones, of the underside of a leopard gecko when they're holding eggs. That was my white's tree frog. I will be showing x-rays. I'm going to be showing a lot of that kind of stuff, like medical stuff. Nothing graphic, nothing gory, but if any of that unsettles you, this might not be the video for you, or you can just listen to the audio and not look at the screen. Another disclaimer, please watch the entire video or use the timestamps to jump around to the issue you might be having before you ask any questions. Ovulation and egg laying is very complicated. If you have a question that I talk about later in the video, it would just suit us both if you just listened all the way through and then asked your question. And the final disclaimer I have for this video, make sure that your gecko is actually a girl, because a lot of people won't know. So I have a video about how to sex your leopard gecko up here. There's pictures in it that will show you strictly what is a girl, what is a boy. It's also pretty easy to tell apart if you just do a Google search. So please know what sex your gecko is prior to actually watching this video, because if you have a boy, none of this is going to apply to them. All right, let's get into ovulation. Any female leopard gecko can ovulate. Now, it doesn't mean that they will ovulate. It doesn't mean that they'll do it every year, but some do. Some ovulate every single year. Some never ovulate. Some ovulate and lay eggs. So where your gecko falls is not only going to be different from other people's, but it's going to be different every single year. Geckos do not have to be bred to lay eggs. They don't have to be bred to ovulate. They don't have to even be near a male to ovulate or to lay eggs. So keep that in mind. So ovulation typically occurs in leopard geckos that are over 40 grams or over a year old. In cases where a gecko has stunted growth, it can be a little bit different. They'll ovulate once they get over a year old or once they hit their maximum growth potential. But some geckos who aren't even a year old yet, if they've already hit 40 grams and it's ovulation season, they may ovulate and lay eggs. So like I said, it can vary quite a bit, but typically geckos that are above 40 grams and above a year old, you can expect them to ovulate. Now, most of my leopard geckos ovulate annually. They ovulate actually this time of year right now, between February and June is when most of my geckos will ovulate. I have some geckos who start a little bit early, so they'll start in January, and I have some that start a little bit late, so they'll start in June or July, but for the most part, at least in my part of the world, you can expect your gecko to ovulate between February and June, or typically right after brumating months. So in springtime is typically when leopard geckos will start to ovulate. The youngest gecko I've ever had ovulate was under a year old. She was 10 months old, and that's Egret. And the oldest gecko I've ever had ovulate is Renly, who's over 10 years old and still ovulates every year. You can expect ovulating female leopard geckos to have a behavioral change, to have physical changes, and to have appetite changes. So behaviorally speaking, they will become more active. Typically, you can see them scratching the glass in their enclosure or digging a lot, trying to escape. I think it's because they're trying to find a man. So just keep that in mind. If you see yours have a really big increase in activity, it can be because of ovulation. Now, they also may have physical changes to their body. Ovulation is quite difficult on a leopard gecko. It's not something that they're not able to handle, but you will notice their weight fluctuate. So an ovulating gecko will typically retain some weight in their abdomen and lose weight in their tail. Now, this is okay. I wouldn't stress unless your gecko is losing a lot of weight and the size difference between their tail and their abdomen is drastic. However, just keep in mind that when they are ovulating or have ovarian follicles, or when they're growing eggs, their abdomen is going to be a bit bigger looking and their tail might shrink because it takes a lot of energy for them to create the ovarian follicles or eggs. Now let's talk about their appetite changes. You can expect ovulating geckos to go off food. Now typically if they start to produce eggs, they will go back on food because they need that energy. But there are geckos who also lay eggs and still refuse food. Ovulation season is when I experience food pickiness the most. I don't experience it when cold weather hits or when geckos start to... Hello, Coco. Or when geckos start to brumate, but I do notice it when my geckos ovulate. Literally, as soon as they start ovulating, they don't care about food. That's just my experience though. You might have a different experience, but with all of my girls, they pretty much go off food the moment they start ovulating. So they might go off food, they might have a decreased appetite, they might just decide they don't want to eat one certain type of food. A general food pickiness or lack of appetite is expected in ovulating geckos. Now let's talk about how you can check if your gecko is ovulating. So like I mentioned earlier, an ovulating gecko's abdomen will be thicker or fuller or like more bloated looking, and that is because they're developing ovarian follicles. Now there's a lot of things that can happen with these ovarian follicles, but the good thing is you can see them. So if you hold your gecko, they're not going to like this by the way, but if you hold your gecko upside down just briefly, or hold them like upright so you can see their belly, what you want to look for are small pink circles. They'll be pretty bright, but sometimes they'll be like a little white dot surrounded in pink. Usually there's a couple of them at a time, and what those are ovarian follicles, which will develop into eggs if your gecko's body decides to develop them into eggs. It's also possible they don't develop them, but we'll get to that in a minute. So just to be clear, if you see 1 or 2 pink circles, that is an indication that your gecko is ovulating. And if you see 1 or 2 white circles, sometimes surrounded in pink, sometimes not, that means your gecko is developing ovarian follicles. Ovarian follicles can turn into eggs, they can be reabsorbed by the body, or they can have follicle stasis occur, but we'll talk about that later. If they do decide to develop them into eggs, you won't see the pink anymore, but you will see 2 or 1, sometimes it's 1, but usually 2, very round, very oval shaped, bright white eggs. I mean, they like a beacon through the skin. Like, they're very bright. They shouldn't be confused with the abdominal fat storage in a leopard gecko, which you can see through the skin and does kind of occur in the same area. But the whiteness that the eggs have can never be confused with like the fat storage, because the fat storage is white, but the eggs are white. I mean, like, you can see them straight through. You might not even notice that there are eggs in your gecko until like just before they're laid, because you're like, oh my gosh, why is their abdomen so large? And then you look and you see 2 giant white ovals. That's okay. Just make sure that when you notice them, you prepare for them. So if your gecko does have eggs, what you want to do is make sure that you have a lay box present, because they're going to need somewhere to put those eggs. You want a lay box to consist of a couple inches of moist substrate, whether that be eco-earth, whether that be soil. Some people use vermiculite, I think that's how it's pronounced, but everyone has like a different choice in what they put in there. As long as you are giving them some sort of substrate to dig in and a place for it to stay, then your gecko will probably lay there. Now, I've had geckos who have multiple areas to lay eggs and they've still just laid it flat out in the middle of their enclosure. Every gecko is going to be different, but just as long as you are providing that place, you shouldn't have too many concerns about like your gecko becoming egg bound, which we'll get to in a bit. Now, it's not uncommon for a gecko to lay a single egg. However, it's more normal for there to be a clutch. So typically in geckos that have never laid an egg before, they'll lay a single egg the first time, and then every time after that, they'll lay 2 eggs. Sometimes in a season, a gecko will lay 1 egg, and then the next clutch will have 2. But typically if a gecko only lays 1 egg, you want to check their underside and see if there's another one still in there, because if there is, that presents a problem. Now, if you didn't breed your gecko, these eggs will be infertile. You can tell that they're infertile by candling them, which is basically where you take the egg, and you want to gently handle it, by the way, but you take the egg and you put it over the like light on your iPhone or your cell phone or whatever. It's just a little flashlight. You put it over on top of the flashlight and it will shine right through the egg. And if you see nothing but yellow, it's a dud or an infertile egg. If you see some pink veining, or better yet, if you see a tiny little pink ring, sometimes referred to as a Cheerio, if you see that, that means that it's fertile. Now, leopard geckos are not known to be a parthenogenetic species, so they do not have eggs like without a partner. Some geckos do that, but it's not leopard geckos. Leopard geckos are not known to do that. So it's not something you should be worried about. However, if you have two geckos housed together and you think they're both girls and one lays an egg, I would definitely double check just to be sure, because sometimes people will have leopard geckos cohabbed and think that they are the same sex when they are indeed not. By the way, I don't recommend cohabbing, but that's a separate issue entirely. Another way that you can see if an egg is fertile or infertile is just to look at the shape of it. So a fertile egg will typically be a bit more firm, it'll be a bit fuller, and an infertile egg will typically be like floppy. Infertile eggs can also have dents in them, so like if it is laid and then the shell hardens a bit like after being laid and has like dents all over it, it's typically infertile. Again, you can just candle it to know for sure, but if your gecko hasn't been with another gecko, it's probably infertile. So what can you do if you notice that your gecko is ovulating? You want to continue to offer food even if they reject it every time you offer it, because on the off chance that they will take food, you want them to eat, because ovulation can be a bit of a challenging time for leopard geckos, and so you want them to be able to have as much energy as possible. So even if they refuse food and you think going into it, oh, they're not going to eat this mealworm, keep offering it just to see if they'll take it. Another thing you're going to want to do is increase the calcium that you're offering, because it takes a lot of calcium for them to develop eggs, and so if they are ovulating and decide to develop eggs, you want them to have good calcium stores. Now, if you notice that they are developing eggs and you actually see the eggs and they are not eating and you are worried about their calcium, what you can do is mix some calcium and some water. And if you're worried about them not eating and they've lost a lot of weight, you can also mix a bit of Repashy grub pie in here, but you just want a nice like watery substance. You don't want it to be really thick, and you can put it in a dropper and offer it to them that way. Now, don't like force feed them, you know, like just put a little bit on the front of their mouth and then they'll lick it off, and then you can put some more. It's tedious, but it might offer you some comfort to know that like your gecko still did get a little bit of calcium, a little bit of water, and a little bit of food in them while they're developing the eggs. Again, make sure that your gecko has access to a dig box. A lot of times you can just utilize the humid hide. So my humid hides in my enclosures are Tupperware containers with holes cut out in them, and they have substrate in them. I'll typically add more substrate to geckos that I notice are ovulating or developing eggs, but you can just utilize a humid hide as a place for them to lay eggs. One thing to note about egg laying is that they can lay multiple clutches in a season. I personally have never seen more than 5 clutches, but that's 10 eggs. So like if you have a gecko that lays a clutch of eggs and then 3 weeks later lays another clutch, think about how hard that is on their body. They're literally developing these giant eggs, and then 3 weeks later 2 more eggs, and then 3 weeks later 2 more eggs. So what you want to make sure you're doing is offering as much food as they will take. Of course, like there's limits to that. You don't want to like bloat them to death, but you do want to offer them more food. Like, so if they are actually taking food in between clutches, which mine have done, offer them daily, you know, give them a little snack in like the days you normally don't feed. So just to make sure that they're replenished, you know, because it is hard on their body. Make sure you're offering food that is healthy for them. Make sure you're offering fatty foods as well. Make sure you're offering calcium. Just kind of like be proactive about making sure that they're going to be able to stay healthy while producing these eggs. Another thing I want to mention is that just before the eggs are laid, you might actually notice that they are lower in the abdomen and like they're kind of bulging out of the abdomen. It's really strange looking. You may also even notice that the vent is slightly open, and typically when you see that, they're going to lay the eggs like the next day or like that night. Here comes some of the more challenging bits. So if your gecko has fully developed eggs inside of them, and you've noticed this, you can see it, and they hold those eggs for more than a few weeks, it's possible that your gecko is egg bound. Egg binding basically occurs when the eggs are retained and they are not laid. Geckos can become egg bound for a number of reasons. There could be underlying health issues, there could be a calcium deficiency, it could be genetic, it could be because they're feeling too weak to pass the eggs, it could be because there's too many eggs, it could be because there's an inappropriate laying area so they can't find somewhere to put the eggs. In an egg-bound gecko, the abdomen will look really swollen. I'll put some pictures on the screen of when Melisandre was egg-bound. It was like insane, the intensity of her abdomen. When your gecko is egg bound for multiple weeks, the eggs aren't coming, what you should do is consult a vet. A vet will typically do x-rays to see if there's something internally going on that's stopping the passage of the eggs. They'll also confirm eggs, and they can also offer different methods of how to get the eggs to pass. Now for Melisandre specifically, I was told that if she did not pass them on her own in 2 weeks' time, that they were going to basically induce her. They were going to give her a chemical that would make her body want to rid the eggs. Fortunately, Melisandre decided to lay her eggs and we didn't have to do that because it would have been hard on her body. Oh, and we believe that Melisandre retained her eggs because she's an enigma, and so she just already has a whole host of issues. So her retaining her eggs, you know, it's not really a surprise. However, she had 2 eggs. She laid 1 egg, and then 2 weeks later, she laid the other egg. So she just, I guess, was building up the strength to lay the eggs. And the eggs themselves looked really odd. They were like hardened in some parts, they were oddly colored, and they were really just huge. They were really not normal eggs. If Melisandre was unable to have passed the eggs with the vet's assistance, surgery is typically the next option. And surgery is very risky with leopard geckos, especially when it comes to like ovarian follicles and eggs, because they can rupture and burst during the surgery and that can kill your gecko. So it's really a thing to be taken seriously, but if that's your only option because the eggs simply won't be passed, then that's your only option. I'm very happy Melisandre decided to lay hers on her own. I'm also happy to report that the following year that she ovulated, which was last year, she didn't have any problems passing her clutch. I wish she wouldn't develop them at all because her enigma syndrome gets worse with each ovulation season. But she's doing her own thing, so can't be helped. So let's talk about ovarian follicles for a minute. Ovarian follicles are what develop into eggs. Now some geckos, and I'd probably say most geckos, don't develop them into eggs, they just reabsorb them. However, there can be an issue with reabsorption in that it doesn't occur, but they also don't become eggs. Then you'll have these follicles just build up in the reproductive organ and cause a lot of problems. I had a gecko named Asha who had follicle stasis and she died, and I didn't know she had it until after a necropsy was done, which a necropsy, for those who don't know, is basically an autopsy. And so she just one day wasn't functioning. I mean, like, she was completely normal 1 week, and then the next week she was completely not functioning, and it took all of 6 days for her to be normal and then deceased. And the reason this is because follicle stasis, the buildup of all of these ovarian follicles, puts pressure on the other organs and it may stop them from functioning properly. Now, sometimes with follicle stasis, you will actually see physical symptoms like not pooping or a lot of abdominal bloating. However, Asha was still pooping. Asha didn't have any abdominal bloating. So it's also, you might just not notice them. Now, please keep in mind, Asha was an African fat-tailed gecko, not a leopard gecko, so there might have been some difference, but I figured I should include her because that is what she passed away from. In order to treat follicle stasis, surgery is often required. I actually know someone on Twitter whose gecko had surgery for follicle stasis a couple years ago, and I did receive their permission at the time to talk about their gecko and share the pictures and share their experience. This was years ago because I have been planning on doing this video forever, but because I've had like traumatic experiences with my geckos having follicle stasis or being egg bound, and not all my geckos, just 2 of them, but I have a lot of geckos. But it's just like a hard time of the year because Asha's death was so sudden and it sent me reeling for a long time. And then I decided to just wait to put out the video for a few more years because I was like, let me just have a couple more ovulation seasons under my belt, because then I'll have all of this experience and knowledge to actually be able to offer. But yeah, so that's why I waited so long to do it. But Since we're talking about follicle stasis, I would like to share those pictures and I'll put them on the screen here. This leopard gecko had follicle stasis. There was abdominal bloating noticed prior. The amazing vet was able to remove all of the follicles and the gecko made a full recovery. So it's a really great outcome. Now, unfortunately, there's not always a great outcome. Sometimes the ovarian follicles will rupture and burst during the surgery and that can kill them. So it's really unfortunate, but surgery is the option if the gecko has ovarian follicles. Now, one way to avoid follicle stasis is to make sure that your gecko is getting plenty of calcium. However, some geckos still end up getting follicle stasis and it is how it is. Another issue that leopard geckos can have is egg fusion, and that is where the two eggs become joined. So instead of just having like two separate eggs, there will be one giant egg or two eggs that are fused together. And this can pose a lot of problems because it can be very difficult for them to pass this egg that is like so large or fused together. Now, in order to confirm this condition, you'll have to have an x-ray done. I mean, you can see a really large egg in the abdomen, but an x-ray will even offer like further insight because it's actually looking inside your gecko, whereas you can only look from the outside. The good thing is that some leopard geckos have been able to pass fused eggs without any surgical interference or any chemical or medical interference whatsoever. However, there are some geckos that are unable to and can become egg-bound with this fused egg, and then surgery is required. In a situation where you expect that your gecko has egg fusion, I would consult a vet. Another condition is called egg bursting, which is exactly what it sounds like. The egg ruptures while in the body or while being passed through the body. Sometimes it can be just a simple leak, other times it can rupture entirely. This can be fatal to your gecko because that means that the inside of the egg will be leaking out. Sometimes the gecko is lucky and this happens as they're passing the egg, so everything is left out, everything is pushed out, but sometimes it happens when the egg is still inside the gecko. If you know your gecko is carrying eggs and you see liquid coming from your gecko's vent, like a yellowy whitish liquid, which is typically what the inside of the egg looks like. If you see that coming from your gecko's vent, consult your vet because it's possible that egg bursting is what happened. And here's some other things to consider if your gecko decides to lay eggs. 1, their poops are going to be different. I have experienced this, my friends have experienced this, and there's no real like one way that all egg-laying geckos' poops should look. They just look different than normal poops. They may be a different shape, they may be a different consistency, they may be a different color. If it happens over and over again, you can consult your vet, but if your gecko is laying eggs and it has 1 or 2 strange poops, it's not something I'd be really concerned about because it's been widely documented in people who keep leopard geckos. The last thing I want to say is that ovulation season can be very stressful for geckos. It can be very stressful for gecko parents. Just take a deep breath. It is going to be okay. Most times your gecko is going to come out of ovulation season completely fine, and all of the scary things that I've talked about in this video will not happen. But you should be aware of them, and that's why I talked about them, and I'm glad you made it to this point in the video. But just take it easy. Eat a snack, drink some water, take a deep breath. Whenever you're feeling stressed that your gecko is ovulating, or if you're worrying about any of the things that could happen, just find a way to right yourself, whether it be listening to music or baking or whatever. Those are mine, by the way. But whatever it is, find that, because it can be very stressful to be a parent for a gecko in those times. And I just want you to know you are not alone in that. Everybody has gone through stress for their animals during ovulation season, and it will be okay. It'll happen again the next year, but it'll be okay then too. But that's all I have to say about leopard geckos, egg laying, and ovulating. If you have anything you want to add or think I missed something, please leave it down below. I encourage everyone who watches this video to go read about other people's experiences in the comments, because I have a lot of female geckos, but even so, I can't speak to all the experiences other people have had. So please feel free to leave a comment down below about your experience, and also please feel free to go read those comments. I ask that everybody be respectful in the comments. Jackson scared me. I do ask that everybody be respectful in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found this informational and insightful. Please leave a like if you liked it. If you didn't, that's okay too. Leave a comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. My wife's tree frogs be at it again. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.